In 2017, following the release of Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, and Wonder Woman, the next piece of the DC Extended Universe was set to be Justice League, and it was set to once again be directed by Zack Snyder, who had previously directed Man of Steel and Dawn of Justice. However, partway through production, Snyder sadly had to pull out due to the death of his daughter. So, with the film getting 3/4 complete, the job of completing the film fell to director Joss Whedon, or it was handed off to director Joss Whedon. And he ultimately ended up cutting quite a lot of the film, refilming certain scenes, and it ended up with a film that, for most people, was pretty divisive. Now, here's the thing. On paper, Joss Whedon doesn't actually look like the worst choice to finish the film. I mean, while I might be a little bit biased here because of this, he has directed three of my favourite TV shows of all time. That's been Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dollhouse, and Firefly. But also aside from that, he did also direct the first two Avengers movies, Avengers Assemble and Avengers Age of Ultron. And while he would ultimately hand off the directing responsibilities to the Russo brothers for Infinity War and Endgame, he isn't, on paper at least, he wasn't the worst choice to go with. Now, he ended up with a film, after all the cut downs and reshoots and everything, it finally ended up with a divisive film, but it came in just under 2 hours, which was expected. Now, because of its divisiveness, it didn't do very well at the box office, and as a result of that, they decided to go off and focus more on solo outings for heroes rather than big team ups for the foreseeable future, including the likes of Aquaman, Shazam, Birds of Prey, and Wonder Woman 1984. However, shortly after this, rumours started circulating that there was actually a completed version, or at least a nearly complete version, of what Zack Snyder had originally intended for the film. So, of course, petitions started off online, people started asking to see it, until eventually it was announced that they would release an alternate version of the film directed by Zack Snyder, referred to as the Snyder Cut. And this would follow more closely to what Snyder had originally intended for the film. So it was finally released earlier this year on HBO Max, mainly because people couldn't go to cinemas because of lockdown and the pandemic. But it was finally released on HBO Max, and it was released recently on DVD. So I've got it here, and do and it came in at just under 4 hours for the entire thing. Now, I remember hearing at the time that the film was going to be much longer, kind of around 4 hours, and I forgot that for a while. And then when I bought it, I stuck it on to play. I pushed the information button, it'd bring up 2 hours 16 minutes. I was like, oh, I can watch that in a day. So I started watching it, and then by what I thought was about halfway through the film, they were just getting to Cyborg's backstory, and I was like, I'll hold on a sec. And looked at the back of the DVD box at 232 minutes. And I'm like, 2.25 hours is only about 136 minutes. Like, so it's going to be continued on the next disc. So, okay, I'm a little bit stupid about that. But the film does add in a lot more. I mean, you can clearly see the framework of the original film, the one that was visible in the theatrical cuts, but it definitely has more stuff added in. For example, it does actually give a bit more backstory for Cyborg, which, I'll be honest, I was glad to see, because I did feel that in the theatrical cuts, Cyborg's backstory was, I think, a little bit lacking. It was just, they didn't really explain how he came to be there, why he was this way. I think I kind of just assumed at the time they were saving that for a Cyborg solo movie, which so far has yet to occur. But it was nice to see a bit more kind of origin for him. There was also, and there was a lot more stuff added in and taken out. For example, there's a little less comedy this time around, which I do think the film actually benefited from. I mean, some comedy is welcome, like they did leave a lot of the comedic parts in for Ezra Miller's Barry Allen, which I do think was the right choice. But then there were a few scenes that definitely had some lines taken out where I did think, yeah, that was the right choice. For example, uh, early on in the film when Bruce goes to talk to Arthur Curry in the small town, he's like, I hear you can talk to fish. I was glad that line was taken out because that line in the original theatrical version did come off as a little cheesy and ultimately out of place. In fact, there are several parts that honestly I was glad were taken out, including that line when they resurrect Superman and he ends up fighting all of them, and then Bruce ends up with the line of, "Yeah, something's definitely broken." And of course, the infamous scene at the beginning of the film, which is supposed to be filmed on like a camcorder or something, or on your phone, and is quite evident of Henry Cavill's top lip, which people have complained about. That's it. But once again, they did add in a lot of stuff, a lot more cool stuff, and also take out some stuff. For example, they added in a new character of Ryan Choi, who in the comics eventually becomes the hero known as Atom, or rather the second version of the Atom. And which it was nice to see them building up a bit here. They also had, as I said, more of a backstory for Cyborg, including the death of his father, to in one critical scene in the second half of the film, which I'll admit I did like the ending in the theatrical cuts of where Silas and his father reconcile and they end up kind of upgrading parts of him, which happens in the kind of epilogue of the film. Which I was sad to see him die, but at the same time I could understand why they did it. Uh, a time travel scene with Barry Allen where the finale ends up going wrong, so he has to go back and do it all again. That's a nice touch. The black suit of Superman, I was hesitant about, but I'm glad they fitted it in. And a final scene in the epilogue involving Luthor and Deathstroke, or rather an edited version of it than what was in the original film. Now, when people were saying that in the Snyder Cut there was going to be Darkseid, and it was also revealed there was going to be Darkseid, Deathside, and Granny Goodness, as well as the original theatrical villain of Steppenwolf, I'll admit I was apprehensive. Namely because I felt by introducing people like Darkseid and Granny Goodness and the like, I felt that they were trying to rush this. I was like, why are you demanding this so quickly? I mean, it's literally as though you're trying to go from Captain America: The First Avenger to Avengers: Infinity War. Like, don't rush it. I mean, that's maybe what I think Joss Whedon had been trying to do when he completed Justice League, which was go save Darkseid up for later down the line. I mean, you can have Steppenwolf in this one, maybe have I don't know, Brainiac or another big villain in the next film, and then move on to Darkseid. To which I'll admit I was apprehensive, but I will concede Darkseid I think was used the exact right amount of this. I mean, Steppenwolf is evidently acting for him, and you can definitely see moments when he's coming, but he never overtakes the film, and personally, I think that was the right call. He's in the film just the right amount of time, and I do think that's a good thing. There's also the dream sequence at the end, which of course involves future versions of the heroes, including Mira and a mysterious apocalypse version of Joker, played once again by Jared Leto, and a few scenes involving another DC Comics hero, Martian Manhunter, who supposedly Zack Snyder had originally wanted to be Green Lantern, but then had been convinced to chop that out and switch it for Martian Manhunter, which was nice to see. Now, here's the thing. I do think, in on the whole, the Snyder Cut is the better film, but how best to say this? I think which film I would ultimately choose to watch will ultimately depend on my mood with time. I mean, here's the thing. We live now in a world where we're allowed to have both. We don't need to decide on which version of the movie is the definitive one. I mean, yeah, there are going to be some people who say that the Snyder Cut is the better film. I'm sure pretty much everyone's saying that. But we don't need to make a decision between the two. I mean, some days I'll feel like I want to watch a superhero film that actually has some meaning, some ground, some weight to it. And for that, yeah, I'll go for the Snyder Cut. But if I just want to sit down and watch a fun superhero movie, kind of on the level of the Avengers, then yeah, I'm going to go for the theatrical cut of Justice League. I don't need to choose between the two. I like them both, and that's ultimately going to be how I stand. I mean, I will admit that the Snyder Cut is probably the better film, but I like both of them, and I'm allowed to like them that way. So, some days I will put on the Snyder Cut, some days I will put on the theatrical cut. And you know what? If you want to sit back and just watch one and pretend the other doesn't exist, fair enough. But I'm not. I'm not that person. And you know what? While we while I think it was announced that we'll never actually get a sequel to the Snyder Cut, that this will just become an alternate version, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad I saw it. And you know what? Maybe sometime in the future I'll end up watching it again. But just calm down. The Snyder Cut, I think, is good. Better than the original theatrical cut? Sure. But that doesn't mean I'm going to throw the theatrical cut away. That's my thoughts on the Snyder Cut of Justice League. Anyway, until my next review, see ya.